Now, moving on, the Pentagon is considering quadrupling its budget for European defence in 2017 because of Russian aggression. That's according to the US Defence Secretary Ash Carter. Now, I'm joined by a former American ambassador to NATO, Robert Hunter, who's a senior fellow at the Centre for Transatlantic Relations in Washington. Now, isn't there a risk that this move could actually provoke Russia and make Europe feel more insecure as a result?
Well, don't think it's going to provoke Mr. Putin beyond what he's doing now, but it will enable Putin to go to the Russian people and make the argument that Russia's being encircled, that Russia's continuing to be marginalized, in order, in part, to help the Russian people be willing to stomach the really quite significant economic impact of what's happening with the sanctions imposed on Russia, plus the collapse of the price of oil.
So we know that this budget is going up. What do you think the money is likely to be spent on? Could it be missiles? Could it be troops? What do you predict?
Well, Secretary of State Ash Carter's already highlighted that it's going to be a quadrupling from about $789 million to about $3.4 billion. Beginning in the fiscal year that starts on the 1st of October. He's going to put 250 tanks in the Central European countries. He's going to continue to rotate American troops in and out of Europe. He's going to put more bases in the East. He's going to pre-position equipment, do a whole series of things. Not so much, in my judgment, to say to the Russians, we can take you on if you force it to do it, but rather to reassure the NATO allies in the East that the United States will stand with them if push comes to shove.
Is this an acknowledgement in some ways that the US hasn't done enough in the face of Russian aggression in countries like Ukraine and also in Syria?
Well, of course, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. And frankly, I think that is where I would have done things differently from the U.S. government right now. Russia is not going to be particularly impressed in terms of what it may decide to do by the relatively small amount of added military capacity that's moving into Central Europe. What they would be impressed by is if indeed there were a significant amount of money and effort that would go into Ukraine to bolster its economy, if we would push the Ukrainians into serious reform, and if we push the Ukrainians into some kind of capacity for the Russian speakers in the eastern part of the country to have more autonomy. I think that's something the United States and the Europeans need to do together. That's where I would put the money if I were really serious about trying to increase security in Europe. This is a nice showpiece, but I don't think it's going to make much of a difference in terms of reality on the ground in dealing with the Russians.
So you're talking about kind of reassurance, if you like. How much of a threat is Russia to Europe?
Well, nobody knows whether Mr. Putin, having swallowed the Crimea, and he, plus his proxies, having taken a good chunk of southeastern Ukraine, most of whose people actually are native Russian speakers, does he intend to go farther? Not necessarily in terms of military action, but let's say economic choke point, the price of gas, the availability of natural gas, cyber attacks such as we saw in recent years in the Baltic states. So what the United States is doing is saying, we will reassure these countries if there's some kind of conventional attack. But I don't think this does what is required in terms of, let's say, deterrence against unconventional attack or in bolstering their economies, and particularly the economy of Ukraine, which I think is the only thing in time which is really going to impress Mr. Putin. It's a nice show, but it's not something I think is money well spent.
Robert Hunter, thank you very much for your time.